Right, hello there and welcome to Literary as Feck, our bi-weekly chat about books and things like that. And as usual, we got Nick there. Hello, Nick.
How are you?
And we have a guest this episode in the form of, well, introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Darren Jones, and I usually talk not books but films with Clive. Also to sound like a completely pretentious twat, seeing as this is a somewhat polemic discussion. 93.
Oh, nice.
That's what Thelemites say to each other.
So the band.
Yeah,
I already had enough.
Yeah.
I'm out of here. No, there's a band, right? Is it the band Current 93?
Oh yes.
That's sort of yes, yeah, and I think they're kind of connected with all this.
Yeah.
Well, my buddy Andrew WK, the rocker, has occasionally played with them.
All sorts of things, right? Wasn't Stephen Thrower occasional member, or because I always get confused with that lot, Current 93, Throbbing Gristle, Psychic TV, Chris. I'm guessing Stephen Thrower's got something to do with that shower of bastards.
Yeah, there's a lot of musicians who kind of kick about with it, and there's all these kind of legends of who used to be in Crowley's organizations like the A and OTO, and
we're getting ahead of ourselves here because right, so
yes, we haven't introduced what we're talking about.
This is what we're talking about. We are talking about PERDURABO, The Life of Alesteir Crowley, the definitive biography of the founder of modern magic by Richard KACZYNSKI. I don't know if he's related to Ted. But so this is kind of, because we take turns making choices on what we're going to read. So this kind of Nick's choice. Initially, yes. You wanted to read something about Alesteir Crowley.
Yes, yeah, and I think when I suggested, can we read like the definitive biography of Alesteir Crowley, what I actually meant was, can we read a 200-page book about Alesteir Crowley that's hopelessly salacious and very poorly sourced?
Right. I've got to jump in here,
right?
Because
yes.
I was asked about which other biographies, which biographies can we read, and there was one that's about 200 pages that I did suggest.
No, this isn't just ours. Yeah, so with that in mind, I knew, well, Darren knows a shitload more about Alesteir Crowley than either of us, and up to him if he wants to disclose about that in due time as we go along, is his affiliations. But so
he is Crowley's grandson, right?
Yes, that's right. So I went to Darren and I said, "Oi, Darren, can you and yes, as he said, he did say, but so it was kind of because I had read, I can't remember what it's called, but someone who was in Blondie.
Oh yeah,
not Debbie Harry, unfortunately.
Gary something, isn't it?
Yes, he wrote the book, a kind of introduction to the world of Crowley, which I did read, and I remember that kind of not quite giving me what I wanted, and we'll get to that a little bit later as well. In I suppose maybe what I want maybe doesn't exist. That might be part of the problem. But so I wanted to go a bit deeper, and you mentioned Darren and more. And again, we'll getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So off air, I have discussed this with Crowley a bit with Darren before, and also modern magic and
Mhm.
certain groups and cults and whatever. And it was quite an illuminating conversation. And something Darren had brought up, which I found quite interesting, was, you can approach Crowley from lots of different angles. And one of the angles was as a sort of anthropologist, I suppose, of magic and putting together a sort of in a similar way like Robert Graves did with the mythologies, and like doing like
Joseph Campbell,
yeah, putting together kind of like a table or something, or like a cross
a unified theory.
and also the different magic systems and how they relate to each other. So that sounded interesting. So judging by what Darren told me, this book at first seemed maybe the best of both worlds. So it would have a little bit of everything in. But it didn't quite turn out like that. Well, for me at least, and we'll kind of get it. So that's the roundabout way we chose this book, as opposed to something called, this man is evil, the most wicked man in the world, or whatever.
Right.
I'm sure there's about 1 million Crowley biographies out there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I'm trying to think of like when I would have even first heard the name. I mean, obviously for me, it would have come through heavy metal. It would have been 1980s, whether it was, what's his face, Ozzy Osbourne, or then, Celtic Frosts, to Mega Therion, however you say it, So, it was always kind of there in comic books, in places like Alan Moore's stuff. Like, so it was one of these names that was always kind of there, or in the movie Things, you may remember, Clive,
yes,
where where Alesteir Crowley's, was it that the horror of 1,000 bloody cuts? So he's kind of ubiquitous in this way in kind of underground culture and in music and stuff. And so and I realized that I actually did know very little about the man and his life and what he'd actually, I think I had heard that his version of the tarot is kind of still considered to be a definitive version of the tarot and things like that, but I didn't, much more than that I didn't know.
Well, I mean, Things is a good example of this, because there is that scene, when he's reading about Alesteir Crowley, and he's like saying, "Oh my God, all these thousands of people that he killed," or something like that. But there's actually a army of people with crap mustaches and mullets out there who know fuck all about Alesteir Crowley, but bring him up all the time.
Right.
And,
what's the documentary about? The documentary about the kids who, the West Memphis 3. Right. Like, doesn't Crowley come up there as well? Yeah. So his name kind of gets attached to all this malarkey, and then kind of muddled up with Satanism and Anton LaVey, which, obviously comes later and is not the same thing.
Go to any small town with bored teenagers, you cannot throw a mullet without hitting someone claiming that they know about Alesteir Crowley.
Yeah, it's the equivalent, isn't it? Remember,
I love her. There's kind of there's elements there as well, I think, right, of this idea of terrifying esoteric cults, and so that's interesting. But I do think maybe it's worth, I think it's a spectrum.
You interrupted Darren there. He was saying.
No, I thought I interrupted.
Okay, go ahead.
No, Nick, you finish your point.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think there's a spectrum of everything, but there's a spectrum of belief, right? And I think maybe before we even start this, I should place myself on the spectrum of belief, right? So I'm raised Catholic, went to Irish Catholic school in Ireland, which I guess is the only kind of Catholic schools in Ireland, and was redundant anyway. So I was told like that, that this literally, through the magic of transubstantiation, becomes the blood of Christ our Lord, that the little wafery biscuits become literally the body of Christ. So I grew up with magic, and there's a lot of incense and smoke and mirrors, and there's a lot of ritual involved in Catholicism. And then at the age of 11 or 12, I started having some serious questions about that. And I think things like Nemesis the Warlock in 2000 AD, I start to learn about things like the Inquisition and all these kind of other, ugly bits of Catholicism, and I drift away. Then as a teenager, I kind of drift into anarchism, which is it's a belief system that depends on you believing strongly in humans' capacity for decency and their ability to get along with each other without hierarchy. So in a way, looking back at that now, it's a replacement for, I felt like Catholicism isn't the thing, it's people don't act in the way that they're supposed to. If there's this golden rule of treat other people how you'd like to be treated, then anarchism kind of replaces it, but it depends on a perhaps misplaced faith in the human capacity for good. And so, but then, so I've never managed to become a full atheist. And this is where I'm interested in Clive's opinion, because I feel like Clive is actually further to being a proper atheist than I've ever managed. I've always been a kind of chicken shit agnostic. And then I'm also fiercely interested in Celtic mythology. And so there's a part of me that yearns to go back to a true understanding of what it was that my ancestors did before St. Patrick ever brought his creed to our island. And yet there's very little, I think, that I can trust because people didn't write down that stuff, right? But I would love to know more about Samhain and about Beltane and about the festivals that kind of marks the seasons and all that stuff. So I'm in this weird liminal space where I'm a big believer in science, but I'm a romantic. I have a romantic attraction to mysticism and to that kind of stuff. But I will admit I'm less interested in religions and in belief systems that originate in places I have no blood connection to, which is why it fascinates me that Christianity, which comes out of the deserts of the Middle East, is the primary religion in in Ireland and England. I don't quite get why it has such primacy. And then why, even when reading this book, why it's all religions like Buddhism and kind of Zoroastrianism and all these things, why there's no real mention of that kind of more homegrown pagan Celtic stuff, or even, animism. When I lived in Japan, the religion I was most interested in was Shinto, because it's all about the rocks and the trees and nature, and that's, I don't know, I guess I have that's a long way of saying that I'm confused. And so so Clive, I just wanted to know, from your perspective, Clive, I feel like you're even further towards that Richard Dawkins-y kind of
right.
Am I correct?
No, you're quite right. Yeah, no, I don't think I was raised particularly with anything. My household was, typical, the church was only there for weddings and funerals, and I was never really raised. I wasn't raised with atheism either. I just drifted to that, and like you, for a long time I was agnostic, and then one day just kind of thought, well, I don't really understand what's kind of holding me back, really.
Right, I need to commit.
Yeah, well, it just seems to me that unless someone lets me know otherwise, then no, we're just heading towards entropy and the heat death of the universe, and that's fine. I mean, it seems to be the case, right? So, how about? Well, first, you were going to say something there, Darren. Do you remember? And then also, why don't you fill us in on, well, you your religious background, if any, and then if you want to, you can lead us into your relations to Crowley and that stuff as well.
Yeah. Actually, the moment passed a bit. I was going to make a flippant remark about a man who used to use the term unbanned in Clive and I's youth.
Yeah, he was a typical. He would have been.
That's the level of understanding a lot of people have of Crowley is that a man who came into my house, a friend of my sister's.
Yeah, to paint
saw that Clive and I. Yeah, Yeah, with a massive mullet, incidentally.
He did.
Of course.
He did have a big, glorious mullet. And yeah, he came into my bedroom unannounced because he was a friend of my sister's, and said, "Oh, are you watching horror films?"
Right.
Yeah, there's a film where they really kill someone. It's called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's unbanned. And that is the level of knowledge that a lot of, as you were saying, that you go to small towns with teenagers who know fuck all about Crowley.
Yeah.
That's exactly the level that we're in.
And who have their things mixed up. So the other great thing he said as well, which I thought was, I always remember, because he basically,
Frank Zappa.
We were shooting the shit, and he was just like half listening to the door, and then he'd interject with these kind of inaneisms. And we were talking about something, and he goes, "Oh yeah, Frank Zappa, yeah, I remember him. He used to shit in a bucket on stage." And I was like, "Oh, you've mixed up him, Ozzy Osbourne, and Gigi Allen or something of new."
Gigi Allen, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, that aside. So yeah, we were talking about kind of giving our sort of spiritual, mystical, religious beliefs. And yeah, actually, I'm pretty close to where Nick is. I would classify myself somewhere in between an atheist and an agnostic.
Eggnog.
An eggnog.
Agnostic.
An eggnog theist.
Yeah.
Yeah, an eggnog theist. Yes.
It's the new thing.
Yeah, well, Christmas is coming up, isn't it?
Everyone's doing the eggnog theist.
Yeah. However,
it's a nice coating on the stomach.
Yeah, but I also kick about. I'm actually I do classify myself as a Thelemite.
Right.
Okay.
If you've read the book, that means that you generally adhere to the philosophy of Thelema, and I choose my words quite carefully there, because some people will see it as a religion. Some people will view the Thelemic pantheon, of Nuit and Hadit and Baphomet and this pantheon of deities as literal deities that are external forces. I personally approach Thelema as a philosophy, that obviously revolves around do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, love is the law, love and what, as we've read in the book. So yes, I consider myself a Thelemite. I base a fair bit of my day-to-day morality around that dictum, and I may belong to one of the organizations that is mentioned in there. In fact, I'm a member of OTO.
Okay.
So
because one thing that I was interesting is just as the book ends, they kind of talk about the way that it sort of passed on from Crowley to other hands, but then it seemed as though the book was suggesting that it sort of seems to just stop with Carl, I can't remember his last name, but the German. Yeah. And it felt as though it wasn't passed on from him, but
well, we're getting technical, but you can kind of trace a succession from Crowley through McMurtry, who's the airman, the American airman who visits Crowley at the end of the book.
Not the McMurtry who wrote the Lonesome Dove books.
No. But yeah, you can kind of trace a little bit of succession through Grady McMurtry, through Agape Lodge in America. Excuse me, and that there is a through line that runs through OTO in America today. Okay. So it is and it isn't an unbroken line, but it's kind of it's there or thereabouts. A succession from Crowley directly to people who are around today.
Just to go back a little bit, just so fill me in here, Doug, because I think maybe this might be instructive. So I think it would be not unfair to say, I don't think you would take offense to say that originally, way back in your early teens, when you were first kind of kicking about this stuff, your entry point would have been via the more mulleted nonsense side of things, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and your appreciation has kind of become more sophisticated or more learned then, or just with a bit more background to it over the years. So,
actually, no. Yes,
okay.
and no. I mean, the way I found out about Alesteir Crowley was I remember it. I think it was when I was 11 or 12. My mother bought me a couple of books from the catalogue that we used to have,
Oh, yeah.
like a mail order thing. And one of them was called Cult and Occult, and I can't remember what the other one was called, but they were these kind of big A4 kind of hardback books, and they give you like a little snapshot, fairly salacious stuff. Oh, in the, this was the Inquisition, and this is demons, and this was Alesteir Crowley, and this was
right.
All this other stuff. Anton LaVey was in there and all that. And it kind of piqued my interest a bit, but very much I was approaching at the time, the occult from very much a kind of, Hammer's Devil Rides Out perspective.
Right.
And it was like, oh yeah, so can you really like summon Satan in a magical circle then?
Yeah.
So and actually, could I actually like do a spell for some money or to lose my virginity? Yeah. That's exactly how I was approaching.
Right. And there seems to be plenty of tits involved as well, which is always an extra bonus, right? Like,
well, yes.
If I go down this road, there's plenty of nudity.
Well, yeah. Well, and that's the I'll this is a side one, but yeah, there's also there's another side to me which is I'm an initiated Wiccan as well. So there's an abundance of nudity kicking around my spiritual life.
You can't keep them bloody Wiccans as clothes on, can you?
You can't. You really can't. Anyway, yeah. So so I did that, and I kind of started off with, I bought the Satanic Bible, mail order from a little bookshop in Northampton. I remember, called a Cultic.
Is that Anton LaVey?
Yes.
Right.
Satanic Bible was Anton LaVey. So I bought the Satanic Bible. I remember buying this crazy book, which is a magical system based on H.P. Lovecraft. So I literally bought a book called the Necronomicon.
The Necronomicon, yeah, I had that too. I think everybody
did have that.
Everybody had that paperback Necronomicon, yes, which claimed to be real, despite the fact that it's
the Mad Arab Abdul Halarad or whatever he's called.
Yes.
Yeah. So I did that, and then I learned. I thought, oh, Alesteir Crowley, and then I bought myself a copy of Magic in Theory and Practice, which I read when I was about 15. Didn't understand hardly any of it. But I kind of within there was kind of a basis of kind of operative magic and magical philosophy in terms of scientific approach to magic, which I had throughout my teens, and then I gave up. When I moved to London when I was 20, I just totally gave up any magic or spirituality, and I had like magical tools that I'd made and stuff.
When you gave up that stuff, because it's interesting, I think I would have met you towards the tail end of that stuff. So you talked a little bit here and there, but it wasn't as if you were really fascinated in it anymore. And I was kind of interested just in terms of, because I'd heard of Crowley and stuff like this, but I'd never, for whatever reason, I was busy with other things, I suppose. You only have a certain amount of bandwidth. I'd never gone down that rabbit hole in the same way as you hadn't, Nick, but kind of knew. But I remember, meeting Darren, it was, great to talk about all sorts of things. But I remember there was one thing that was like, oh, he seems to know a little bit about this, and I know nothing about it. And we talked about it a little bit, but yeah, your interest was definitely waning. It wasn't something that you went on about at all, and maybe you were slightly not reluctant, but like a bit talked out, like yeah. And I was just wondering, was it just something you were bored of, or did you sour on it, or did you actually at one point believe and then not believe, or why did you drift out of it?
It was nothing as exciting as that. I literally, I was leaving kind of, you know, my known life in Wales, you know, in bumfuck nowhere Wales, and I had people that I used to do magic with. I used to practice magic with. I had a little gang, or I was in a little gang of people who used to do magic. We used to go up the mountain and do crazy shit, you know, with swords and summon demons and all sorts. Yeah, my life was changing, and I was moving from, you know, being a kind of, you know, a student, dyed-in-the-wool Welsh citizen to being a citizen of London, where I could all of a sudden, you know, get into Eurofest, you know,
right,
horror all-nighters and nightclubs and stuff. And it was just a shift in my sort of life. It was, you know, it was nothing deliberate. It was just kind of, oh yeah, well, I probably won't be able to do a lot of magic, you know, when I'm in London, because I'm going to have a lot of other stuff to do. I'm starting a university degree. I'm not going to have time, you know.
I mean, it's interesting, again, so from my perspective, that almost sounds like I used to be really fucking bored, and now I've got all this stuff to do, so I don't have to fill my days with that stuff anymore. Did you think that, like, for instance, you said you used to go and do magic up in the mountains or whatever. Do you think you were doing magic? Do you think you were actually doing magic? Do you think magical things happened, or do you think
This is a question. That's a good question. Actually,
did you trick yourself? Was it like a mass hysteria thing where you all believed something had happened, or do you think something did happen? Or
well, I think that as I've gotten older, certainly, and I didn't believe this at the time. I didn't believe this when I was 18, 20, 16 years old, but I certainly believe it now. I think actually that what you just described of you know, making a mass hysteria within yourself or a group of people who you're practicing magic with is actually what magic is, in my personal opinion. I'm not talking on behalf of any, you know, organizations or anything like that, but as a personal view, I actually think that's what magic is all about. And it's about accessing bits of perhaps your subconscious, the collective unconscious, if you believe in that, and causing change within yourself that you can cause change in your external universe. So as far as me, you know, pointing a magic wand and waving it around so in a certain shape, and then I get a bag of money through the post, you know, that's not the thing for me. But so I do believe that I can suspend my disbelief within a magical ritual, in order to change my own consciousness. Actually, in much the same way, I don't know if you're familiar with, like, Derren Brown did some quite good kind of TV shows on a similar topic, where there was one show where you know, he would change someone's attitude from an optimistic attitude to a pessimistic attitude. Or pick optimistic or pessimistic people, and he would lay like a £50 note on the street, you know, and make sure they passed the £50 note, and the optimistic person would pick up the £50 note and spot it. And the pessimistic person would probably spot the £50 note, but because of their pessimism wouldn't necessarily assume that, oh, that's
assume it's a trick or it's a fake.
So that's the level I personally think that magic operates on, and it's very small changes in consciousness and attitude. So that's a personal view, you know?
No. I kind of that makes sense to me, because again, this is one of those things where we were talking off air before, and because we were not out of contact, but we were not in regular contact for quite a while, and in that time, yes, you would discovered Wiccan, for example, or no, not discovered, but had aligned yourself with them, and that always fascinated me, just because coming from this sort of kind of very atheistic point of view, and knowing that you're kind of a smart fellow who doesn't go in for bullshit much. And I remember we had a chat about it, and you kind of explained to me how it's about, it's not as if you, like you said, you don't necessarily believe there are these deities that actually exist and make things happen, but it's the process and it's the ritual that is able to evoke some kind of change within yourself or within a group or something like that. So do you think, like, because it's remarkable to me in a way that you're able to suspend your disbelief to go with it, if you see what I mean. So do you think that that's, like, not necessarily the only way, but do you think that's the value in it is it like a shortcut to be able to do things that if you try and do them in a kind of fully let's say rational way, that it's almost impossible to get at it unless you go the circuitous route? I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, I didn't quite get the last bit.
What I mean is, like, let's say, for instance, you want to affect some, or you might not be even be aware of something that you want to change about yourself, but you might not be happy with your life or the way you are or something like that, and you want to get there. And if you suspend your disbelief and you kind of give yourself over to some kind of well, let's say mumbo jumbo then, but that mumbo jumbo, the act of going through that mumbo jumbo results in something real happening, which is real. Do you think if you try to not go the mumbo jumbo route and you try to do it like in some kind of rational way, do you think you don't get there that way? Like it's like it's a way.
I think it's very much based. It's very much down to the individual. You know, everyone
Right.
is very, very different, and you know, in their psychology,
Yeah,
and in what works for them.
but for people who do that, then do you think that's the is that the benefit of it, that it's something that allows you to do something that you can't reach any other way?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the other thing that I do magic for, and this actually this is Wicca more than philemic type stuff, like the more kind of ceremonial magic that I do, is, you know, it's expanding consciousness. So you know, I can whip myself up into a state where I believe that I'm, you know, going on a journey somewhere, that I'm interacting with higher parts of myself or the universe, which in the cold light of day is total bollocks, because obviously I'm not. But in that moment, I can access parts of myself, parts of my, you know, deep kind of psychology or consciousness, and, you know, I can benefit from that, you know, as an individual, and I can kind of gain understanding or reflection around, you know, whatever the hell it is I'm working on. But also I think it's very, you know, I'm conscious that I'm kind of making this sound like a bit of a self-help Scientology kind of improve yourself
right
thing. That's kind of not what it is, because I'm just talking about how I approach stuff.
Right. Well, that was my next question: is would people, for instance, do you think is coven, is that the correct term for Wicca? Is it coven?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, for instance, other people, obviously you can't speak for other people, but let's see what you think kind of in general. Do you think other people in your coven, to hear you saying, for instance, this is bollocks in the cold light of day, but it gets me where I need to be to do these certain things. Do you think, would there be a split in your coven between people who would say, it's not bollocks, it's real, and then people who agree with you? Or
yeah, I think not necessarily the coven that I'm in, but certainly
right.
as a subculture, or as a you know, a demographic amongst initiated Wiccans, and actually people who are involved in thelemic magic in things like AA and OTO. I think that the two demographics are actually very similar. I think that, yeah, there is definitely a range of opinion that, you know, I know people who approach Wicca or thelemic stuff completely theistically and completely completely on a belief-based trajectory. You know, they genuinely believe that there are external entities that are these things, these gods, that you can talk to and they can talk back to you.
So is there
and that's fine. That's fine. Sorry.
Is there a schism then in that case, or do people tend to be very accepting of, okay, you believe that, I don't actually believe it, but we're all interested in the same thing? Or is there a very definite schism between full believers and kind of people who are in a more utility? There is
not at all.
Right.
Not at all. And both, and both thelemic systems of magic, which is the Crowley stuff, and Wicca have one thing in common, and that's that they are orthopraxic.
Okay.
And not orthodoxic.
Right.
So if for listeners who are not familiar with the term, so an orthodoxy is a path that you follow where you are all meant to believe the same thing. You know, for example, Christ died for our sins. Whereas an orthopraxy, an orthopraxic system, which both Wicca and things like OTOA fall into, is we all do things the same.
Right.
So, in Wicca, we all have, the same, it kind of looks the same, regardless of what coven you're in. You might do things slightly differently. But in general, you generally all do the same stuff. There's a set kind of procedure that you follow when you do magic. The same is true of a lot of OTO kind of AA stuff. Personal magic and stuff that you do in groups. And in both systems, no one's actually asking you what you believe. They're just asking you to follow the same procedure, for similar ends, which are your ends. So,
right.
I got into OTO because I was really interested in the philosophy and actually really interested in the spiritual aspects of the Gnostic Mass. That's my personal reasons for getting into OTO. Someone else may have a completely different reason to get into OTO, and that's none of my business.
So,
and what they believe, I could be sat next to someone in a Gnostic Mass who is interacting, in their mind, is interacting directly with the goddess Nuit.
Right.
And I might think that as well, but I'd be conscious that I'm suspending my disbelief in the moment.
Right.
They may view that completely differently, and they may have a spiritual epiphany in that moment. And that would be their belief system. But we're all at the Gnostic Mass and we're all doing the same stuff. What they actually see and believe is nothing to do with me.
So one quick question before we actually get kind of to the book, and sorry to let you jump in as well. Just to be illustrative, just so I know kind of, because like I said, there are certain things that I need to put in place before I can kind of move ahead. And like I said, again, it's the kind of annoyingly pragmatic kind of way I approach things. But so for instance, with that in mind, with the fact that you don't, let's say that your working knowledge of the history of mankind, let's say, tends to it is probably fairly orthodox in terms of you believe that the Greeks were here, the Romans were there, they were over there, and kind of nuts and bolts, meat and potatoes stuff. So with that in mind, and also the fact that you don't that you're very self-aware of a level of suspending your disbelief. When you say I'm interested in the Gnostic Mass, what is it about the Gnostic Mass that like what is it about the, because I don't even really know what the Gnostic Mass is, but
Okay.
do you see what I mean? It's a bit like if someone like I wouldn't say I'm interested in spaghetti monsters because spaghetti monsters don't exist, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So a Gnostic Mass is very, very, very similar to a Catholic Mass.
Right.
Actually more similar to Russian Orthodox Mass, I'm told.
Okay.
But I wasn't raised Catholic, so I've actually never been to a Catholic Mass. But it's very, very, very similar to a Gnostic Mass, to a Catholic Mass. And it's a kind of a religious ceremony in much the same way as a Catholic Mass is, except one of the main differences is that it's not Christ that's being adored. It's a pantheon based on the polarity and interaction between a god and a goddess, a priest and a priestess, often pretty symbolically sexual, as opposed to what Catholicism has. So there's a lot of phallic and vaginal imagery within the Gnostic Mass, but it's all symbolic. Obviously, it's not people fucking on the floor.
But is it the mythological aspect of that and how it tells a story? Is that what interests you about it? That's what I'm trying to kind of figure out.
No. What actually interests me about Gnostic Mass is the symbolism, and because this is a can of worms I'm opening here, but I'm particularly interested in how the Gnostic Mass relates to the system of the Kabbalah.
Right.
Or the Western version of the Kabbalah, not the Jewish version of the Kabbalah.
Right.
And I'm particularly interested in exploring the Gnostic Mass in Kabbalistic terms, but I'm getting into kind of a little bit too much nuts and bolts there, I think.
I suppose. Sorry, this is the final thing I'll say. Yeah. It's just because what interests it's almost like it's like the other way around to the way I think of things in terms of, so like I said, even though I'm an atheist, I'm fascinated by theology, primarily because for a large part of our history, theology is so tied up with history, and it's a way of telling stories and stuff like that, right? So for me, I'm really interested in history, I suppose, primarily, but then the way to approach it is via theology often. They're kind of intertwined. So I'm interested in things like Jewish mysticism and stuff as well, in related into how people used pre kind of, I suppose, modern science, you could argue, things like alchemy and magic and religions were the science of their day, right? It was a way of approaching and understanding of the world. So my interest is kind of the history of what happened as much as we can reach it, and then almost like periphery in a way, like, and people believed this, and that's what led them to this thing, which is kind of concrete or whatever. So, but that way, it's almost like the other way around. It's like you're more interested in what led people to certain things than the things they led them. Do you know? It's almost like, just for me, it's like we use these tools, these outdated tools, to get to here, and so those outdated tools are quite interesting to look at, like in a museum or something, but we don't use them anymore because we have new tools. So that's the fascinating thing, is you in a way you find like those old tools, and you can still use them. They're still useful, but you're aware that there's newer tools available. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, but also actually that's a really interesting point, because one of the other reasons that I do actually both Wicca and Thelemic stuff is to put myself, or as much as I can, or to try and approximate the feeling and the experience of the people and the cultures that I've read about in ancient history, because I'm a bit of a ancient history nerd. So you know, nothing would please me more than to, you know, to put myself into the head of a high priest of, you know, Inanna back in, you know, ancient Sumer, you know, 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago.
You just say banana.
No.
Oh, what did you say? Sorry.
I think I said ancient Sumer.
Oh, no, of high priest of what?
Oh, Inanna.
Ah, sorry.
Who is a deity from...
I misheard.
Yeah, no.
I got very excited because I want to be a high priest of banana.
Yeah, but that is something else that I'm very interested in. Is as you were saying, Nick, you were talking about you know, wanting to explore, you know, the roots of where you come from in terms of you know, what people call the Celtic.
I mean, I grew up surrounded by the dolmens and by Newgrange and by these structures that, you know, that were pre-Celtic, that the Celts themselves had to make up a mythology to explain what the hell these structures were, because they were made by whatever indigenous group that lived in. So I mean, growing up in a place that has that kind of history and where you have these fairy circles, I mean, it is a magical place to grow up, and it's a place that's very easy to feel that connection to the land and to feel that connection to the mystery of like what are these things, these incredible. I mean, even the science of how they were built is kind of lost on you know, some of the dolmens. How in God's name did they put that stone on top of those two other stones? So yeah, I mean, and I think too, I feel like a sense of loss that you know, the pre-Celts and the Celtic people, the people of Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, and many of the peoples of England have lost that connection as a result of the kind of the coming of the Romans and the coming of Christianity, and that we don't really know. And that's, I guess, I'm interested in Wicca in as much as I'm interested to know where did the rituals come from, because my understanding is that, you know, I mean, you read about druidic wands, you read about some of this stuff, right? You read about, but it's so hard to separate, like, what did the Romans write that was bullshit? Kind of anti-Celtic, you know, like, so where was it cobbled together from? Modern paganism, modern Wiccanism.
Wicca's got fuck all to do with anything pre-20th century.
Okay.
That's
so
some people will try and argue different, but that's the reality, is that it was conceived in the 20th century.
Right. Okay.
But one of the things
for something that may be lost, then I suspect.
But it answers that, you know, I mean, because back in the early 20th century, you've got people like Crowley, you've got people like Yeats, you know, who are
in Ireland,
who have this longing, you know, for you know, the way I'm describing it, which is exactly what I, you know, kind of was going to get at, is we want to know what the headspace was,
right,
of our ancestors.
Yeah,
that's actually why another reason I do magic, and particularly Wicca, is I want to get in the headspace of someone who had these beliefs and followed these systems and interacted with deity in that way in ancient history, you know.
Right. Yeah. No. That's interesting as well, because it illustrates another point that I was thinking about as well. Is so, even though I, in general, kind of, you know, don't believe and think a lot of this stuff was, you know, like a lot of what Crowley was up to, for example, and we'll get to the book in a few hours, I promise. You know, I don't believe in this nonsense in the cold light today or whatever, and nothing was actually happening, and you know, that ritual isn't dangerous because no demon's going to come and get you, because there is no demon, and so it's fine, it's not dangerous in the slightest. However, if you think of yourself, you know, let's say close to 100 years ago, which doesn't seem that long ago, but in terms of how we've come ahead, you know, could be almost medieval in some respects. Right? If you imagine yourself in that time and you're in a fucking abbey in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, you know, in the middle of the night, with this sketchy looking dude and noises in the woods, and you're doing all these incantations, and there's fires and there's things, and like you said, there's probably a certain amount of drugs or alcohol or sex magic involved in a heightened mood. Yes, you might, no matter how rational you are, you're gonna shit a brick. And there's a small part, no matter, even fucking Richard Dawkins, there'd be a small bit of his brain thinking, fuck, Beelzebub might just be behind the door, or Belial or something is going to come and snatch my liver or something, because you can't help it. You're human, right? There's the shadows, there's things in them, right? If you can't see them. So, yeah, that is interesting, that no matter how much you can rationalize it, at a certain point, I don't know what you'd call it, some spark of humanity kind of.
Almost like a race fear, or like a human race fear that's really primal, the fear of the dark, right? Like that stuff goes back.
I know there isn't an ancient race of troglodytes in the hills of Wales, but if I went down there 100 years ago with Arthur Machen and a torch he could probably convince me that we should get the fuck out of Dodge, because some goblin might come and devour us.
Yeah. But I think as well is that I've been talking about my personal attitudes towards magic and the occult and whatever. But I think that it's also useful to remember what the and I'm trying to steer us towards the book now.
Yes, good idea.
Please do.
One of the things that the book talks about and describes in quite a lot of detail is the publishing of Alesteir Crowley's The Equinox periodical,
right?
Whose motto is, and I always fucking get this wrong, the method of science and the aim of religion. So, from Crowley's perspective, Crowley may believe he's a prophet, may believe that he had contact with this external entity Iwas. However, his method to scrutinize this belief was always scientific.
Right.
So Crowley will have been in a process of trying to disprove his own. That's an interesting aspect of Crowley that's always attracted me, I must say.
Yes, and it's something that comes in towards the end of the book a little bit as well, more, is to what level was he an active charlatan, and how did that feed into kind of what later L. Ron Hubbard, for example, did as well, right, with dianetics and stuff like that. And
I'm actually going to dash to the toilet. I'm very sorry. I'm going to.
Okay, no, you go ahead. You go ahead. Me and Nick will fill just in case this doesn't edit, and we have to put it in raw. So, is there anything, because you've been relatively silent there?
No, I mean, I think once we get to talking about the book, I'll have lots to say, but it's funny, and maybe when Darren gets back, we can bring this up again, but quite near the end of the book, there's a passage where Crowley himself says, I don't actually know if I was ever in touch with anything outside of myself, that maybe it was just that I was in touch with the God inside of me, or like some sort of higher brain or lower brain, or like that basically. And I thought that was a really interesting caveat, because for so much of his life and so much of the book, he seemed to maintain that he was in touch, or his various scarlet women, right, this endless parade of women he seemed to have, who were kind of his connection to this, having these visions and stuff. But I thought it was very interesting that quite near the end of his life, he seemed to say, it could also be just that this was a way of getting in touch in that way that, like sometimes you wake up from dreams and you're like, wow. I love the ones that are so obvious, where I wake up mad that I've dreamt something where the metaphor is so clear that I treated myself like a moron. Like, I get it, brain. That's clear what you're trying to tell me.
Right.
But again, it's not necessarily a thought or a realization I would have had in my waking moments. right? But my brain has unpacked something that happened in the day or in the week in such a way and couched it in a metaphor that's, as I said, sometimes I laugh at how literal mine will be.
Yeah, like the one I most often have, I think, is the one where I really, really want to take a dump, and I'm running around some kind of, usually like a school or something, and you just can't find a quiet toilet that isn't filthy to, you know, release yourself. There's always someone there. There's always scrutiny, or you just can't find a quiet toilet, right?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And the other ones like any of the dreams where I've had things are blocking your progress. It's that kind of Kafka-esque nightmare where you're trying to get somewhere and constantly you're being slowed down by different problems, and you know you're never going to get to your intended goal. You know, that like frustration dreams. But I can remember having one where basically I felt in a way that I had sort of screwed somebody over. And this happened when I was in Japan, and it had to do with a work situation. And I obviously felt like I'd thrown somebody under the bus a little bit. And then I had this dream where he literally fell down a set of stairs and broke his back, and he was like, "Damn you, Nick, you piece of shit," and I woke up and it was like, fuck you, brain. Like, how dare you be so literal in trying to make me feel bad about this? But I know it was a slightly subconscious guilt. But
that's interesting, to remind me, because they still talk about that, the unsolved bus murder.
Yes, exactly. Of Oimachi. So I do. I mean, I guess we'll get into this more with Darren. This whole question of whether or not here he is back. So we were I don't know if you heard any of that, Darren, but we were just talking about that quite near the end of the book there is a passage where it seems like Crowley says, that he's not entirely sure he was ever in touch with anything outside of himself. That in fact, all of this may have been him getting in touch with some higher brain or lower brain or something like a God within rather than a God without. And then I was kind of connecting it to this idea of having these. I often have dreams that are couched in ridiculously literal metaphors, where I wake up and I'm like, come on, brain, like I get it. But they are things I'm obviously working through, and I'm not really consciously working through them until my unconscious has a chance to unspool a little movie for me that kind of lets me know what I'm not dealing with in my waking hours.
If I may suggest, shall we stick a pin in that then? Because that's kind of interesting, because that's towards the end of the book.
Sure. We'll have to talk about the book.
Then. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but it's an interesting point, I think, but it's one that'll be more prescient after we've kind of gone through the thing. So like we said, looking for the definitive Crowley book. And from the onset, and obviously we'll all have a different opinion about this, but I don't think this is the one for beginners. And not just because I was trying to think of a good example about this, and it'll be interesting because I think you and me, Nick, probably have more or less the same views, that it's a torrent of, it's a bit too much, and it's all the other people you met and stuff.
I did feel like the narrative bogs down, because it seems like every time we introduce a new character comes into Crowley's life, we stop the forward momentum of his life and we go back and kind of right to the beginning of that person's life and what's led them to meeting him. And that happens so many times because such a huge number of characters enter his life.
Yes,
that a part of me was kind of getting frustrated.
Don't come back again as well. So it's like you've put in the groundwork to learn who this person is, and then you never hear about them for the rest of the book.
Right, they're only in his life for a few months and then they're gone.
I was trying to think of an example of what. So I'm kind of interested what Darren thinks purely as a reading experience. So I was trying to think, like, if someone wrote a book about a figure I was already really interested in, then regardless of the merits of the book, I would quite enjoy reading it. So for instance, if someone were to write a similar book about, I don't know, Marky Smith, for example, and it was just Marky Smith went here, he went to the supermarket, he met this bloke, small biography of this person, then he went over here, and then he did this, and then he got into a fight with someone, and then I would actually read that cover to cover, and I would be fascinated by it. I don't know why. It just for some reason I'm fascinated by Marky Smith.
But the level of detail in Perdurabo,
yeah,
to use your example, would be Mark went to the the Cross Keys in Leeds, got in a fight with someone, and he broke his nose.
Yes.
The man who broke his nose was born in 1982.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Oddly enough, because I'm so fascinated in him, or choose other person, I would actually have no problem reading that, and I would enjoy it. So I was just wondering, did Perdurabo serve that function for you? Was it actually a much easier read than it was for me? And like, did you actually enjoy reading Perdurabo? Was it a fun read, or was it a slog for you as well?
Yeah, it is a bit of a slog, to be honest.
Okay, but even as someone fascinated, still
because I think that Kaczynski's got a definite narrative that he's putting forward, and it does move forward. The chapters are themed, and it does it's a chronological account of his life. But I think it's so loaded with detail for bigger Crowley nerds than me.
Right.
That it does become pretty hard going a lot of the time.
Do you think they would enjoy reading it on that level, like a proper big Crowley? Do you think they might enjoy reading it just in the way that sometimes you just enjoy reading about something that you like reading about, or do you think it still falls down as a book?
I think it falls down as a book, because I think he's trying to tread a middle ground between a reference manual almost, for who was Jane Wolfe again? Jane Wolfe, right? Yeah, born this year.
Right.
And I think that he's not entirely succeeded in telling a story, which is Alesteir Crowley's life. And I think he also wants to become an encyclopedia of the people in Crowley's life, and I think that the level of detail is a little bit excessive.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's almost as if there should be a separate book, which is like the Crowley encyclopedias, which I'm sure probably does exist, and you look at specific things related.
Yeah, and this detail is only important to people who are heavily involved in scholarship around Crowley, and or things like succession lineages within the AA and that sort of thing.
Right.
That I assume is his reason for including all this biographical detail on superfluous characters.
Because if you're reading it to find out about Crowley, it's almost like interesting info, take a break for in the weeds details that you're not going to retain in your brain and you don't need to follow the narrative for a few pages, then back to the Crowley story. And then, so it's almost, you'd like to edit out those bits and put them in the Crowley encyclopedia and then just be left. But also the other thing I felt Kaczynski did have a bit of an agenda, very much to rehabilitate Crowley's reputation and have him not as the wickedest man in the world, right? And I actually think that's actually quite not a bad idea. It's quite a noble, but in a way, if you take out that stuff, it makes the story less interesting in a way, doesn't it? Because it's the salacious stuff that is kind of interesting, whether it's true or not. And I think Kaczynski assumes that the reader almost has a certain amount of working knowledge of the tabloid version of the story, which I kind of happen to have just because I'd read that Blondie guy's book. But I still feel as if I didn't quite have enough background to follow it. There's weirdly, even though there's too much detail, on the other hand, he also kind of takes it for granted that other things, if you see what I mean.
I think as well, not that this is a book on Thelema, as a concept or a belief system, But I did find that there's a surprising lack of general explanation as to
yes,
what the stuff Crowley did actually.
Yes, absolutely,
is.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Further reading, if you or anyone else wants to have a look, I would recommend John Simmons' book, whose title which is not it's not full of exactly accurate stuff. But sorry, I was looking at my bookshelf to see if I could see it. I think it's called The Great Beast.
Okay.
I think it's called.
Yes, I think
John Simmons is the author. But that's got quite a nice little balance between all of the salacious stories and a little bit of explanation about what actually, Thelema's all about, and what these concepts are.
Right.
Crowley's published.
Because there's parts of PERDURABO which it's like you said, there's microscopic detail leading up to something very important and the people, and then when it actually gets to the point, it's just there's a part which should be fascinating reading about one of these excursions into the desert, for example, and all the people, and what happened in the days leading up to it, and who's involved, and then the actual bit about the ritual or whatever, and then they went into the desert and they summoned something, and it came, and then someone broke their leg or something, and then it's done, and you're like, oh no, back up, like what you can't just say to me. There's parts of it which are almost just saying, and then they did some magic, and then it moved on, and it's like, what? I need a bit more than that, like.
Yeah. And well, I remember reading there's a bit in there, and I know what this stuff is because I've done further reading. I've studied this stuff a little bit. But there's a bit in there, I think, where they summon. It's actually one of the more interesting stories, to be fair. But they summon Coronzon, who is this guardian of the abyss that is like this trickster demon they summon. I don't know if you remember that part. Where he lies.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Very, very Devil Rides Out kind of.
Yes.
Stuff.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's that. That's one of the better bits of the book, to be fair. But there's very little extrapolation on why Crowley might want to do this, or what this is in context. What is Coronzon? What is the abyss? What does it mean?
Yeah.
And I was really, as I was reading it, I was fascinated to see, well, I know what it means because, I've spent however many years reading about this stuff already. So I already know what these references are.
Right.
But, I was conscious that you and Nick are not going to have probably much of a clue what these things are. So I'm fascinated to know, where you're coming from.
Well, I think it reminded me of the first time I read 12 Caesars by Suetonius, which I don't know if you may have read that before. But in that, like, it's a great book because it is one part like salacious rumor, one part like just straight up history, but then it's interspersed with these moments where these portentous things happen. Like at this point, an eagle dropped a cat with one eye into the arms of Claudius. And it just presented as fact, like this happened over and over again. And it's like a real mindfuck of a book for that reason. But this in a way was kind of the same for me. It was like, like raw factual data. And then suddenly I have to suspend my disbelief pretty seriously to believe that they summoned anything that anyone could see or hear, right? Because
also, there's not enough of it as well, in so much as, like, I understand he might not have wanted to take the time to do it every single time, but just once it would have been nice to have, like, well, tell me exactly how one, the nuts and bolts of this ritual, like, where do you draw the chalk line, or where do you put the goblet of eagle's shit, or whatever the fuck, like specific kind of things. I want to see it. I want to, doesn't matter if I believe it or not. The fact is, I want to know what the process of doing this is. And he never gives us that. But I do know, about what colored trousers some bloke Crowley bumped into in the supermarket wall.
The picture's not painted, is it? It's you know,
Yeah.
you want to know, what was he waving a sword around?
Right,
was
exactly.
he wearing some funky robes? What was this? Does a circle look like this?
It's weird, and it's like that all the way through. I was starting to wonder. I was wondering, what do you think about this, Darren? Is there a level of it, like, because obviously this Kaczynski guy, I mean, you only have to look at his picture. He's obviously into this, right? Like, there's no two ways about it, right? He's immersed in this. So I'm wondering, is there a certain amount of like secrecy or something like that? Like he doesn't want to give away certain secrets or something like that. Like, because some of it's a bit smarmy in terms of like, what annoyed me is every now and again a certain person, they'll tell his name and then in brackets you'll have something which I guess symbolizes their position in the hierarchy. Yeah, and it's like, fuck off. Just fuck off. Stop doing that. You could have cut 100 pages out by editing all that shit out, right? And so there's that level of like, I know, but you don't, kind of thing. So is he trying to protect like some sort of secretive? Why is that detail not in it, do you think?
Well, I'll explain something actually that's interesting. I don't know Richard Kaczynski's status within things like OTO or AA, or any of the stuff that still exists today that Crowley started.
Right.
So I just don't know, but talking personally, I'm a member of OTO, which means I have sworn certain oaths of secrecy.
Okay.
Right? Which means there are certain things that I can't talk to you about.
Right.
Or anyone about who's not an initiate of OTO.
Mm-hmm.
However, the level of secrecy that is required of me as a member of OTO is simply not to reveal two things. First thing is the details of the initiation rituals that I've undergone.
Right.
Secondly, to reveal the details of any other member.
Right.
So they're the rules, right? Anything else I can talk about.
Okay. So it wouldn't be forbidden knowledge for the outsider then to tell you.
No, I don't think so. No, not at all. I mean,
ritual.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, you could, you can pick. I mean, I've got hundreds of books right there that describe in intimate detail, the sort of procedure that he would be doing.
I assume so, but it was just a theory. I couldn't figure out why every single time he skips over it. But it's almost as if he's been careful, to edit that stuff out or to not get into it. But so
yeah, well, I think again though I think his reasons for doing that is he wants to be a reference manual, for people who are interested in tracing their own line of succession in their own magical systems. So when you put whoever it might be, and you put in brackets what their grade was in AA or what their grade was wherever, then that can tell you, okay, so in 1936 this person was 9-3, and that means that they were allowed to initiate people, which means that my line is valid, which means that my line of succession within this system is valid. So I think that's probably the reason that he's including that detail is to be a reference of that sort. But that doesn't help the general reader.
No, you've gone clear, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and again, I must admit, and I hope you did catch the hints that I was throwing at you, that this is a little bit of a dry, over-detailed tome.
So maybe we should focus a little bit on some of the things that I did find interesting, or we can maybe just jump in. I mean, because to be honest, I didn't really know anything about his mountain climbing career. So that was a big chunk of the early part of the book deals with his free climbing, these various cliffs and stuff in England. And it was fascinating, and that he was kind of, you know, within a small group of people who I guess did some of the earliest climbs on, you know, like Everest, right? Was one of the,
well, he did
peaks,
K2,
or was he on Everest? He was
K2,
K2, right?
And KACZYNSKI was the disastrous one, right? When
Right.
That's an interesting thing as well, is the point about it maybe being a bit of a whitewash or trying to kind of re-establish Crowley's characters. The KACZYNSKI expedition is one of those contentious points, in so much as, you know, in retrospect, with the whole wickedest man in the world thing, people tend to think it's like, oh, he left these people to die, and he could hear their screaming from his tent and cackled to himself. And then the Kaczynski point of view is, oh, well, he actually wasn't fully aware of what was going on. And I'm not really invested enough to kind of care one way or the other, really. But it's interesting to note that there are those two kind of opposing views of this man. And throughout this book, and thinking about Crowley, it's fascinating to think of how, like I mentioned earlier, if you take away the salacious stuff, if you take away the wickedest man in the world stuff, what's left is just an inquisitive, smart fellow. And if you don't believe in the magic either, then do you know what I mean? It makes him less of a singular figure in a way. And then I'm starting to wonder, why am I reading about him? Do you know what I mean?
I do, but I think the book does support. I mean, it doesn't support the view that he's literally the devil and that he's into, you know, I mean, but I do think that the book supports both views. I mean, like there is an almost sociopathic quality that kind of comes through in his relationships, the way that he seems to be able to pick people up and then discard them with very little concern, right? The sheer number of Scarlet women, and obviously, you know, was it like, is it the chicken or the egg, right? Like, was he a man who just attracted women who were borderline personality disorder, right? And they were attracted to him because he was a magnetic figure, and they were already interested in kind of things that were, and not just women, but men as well. Like we see a lot of people who kind of descend into madness, or kind of their lives are, you know, they kind of come into his orbit. But would they have anyway, right? Because they're obviously people who were on the margins in some ways. But there does seem to be a callousness that's really interesting. And so at one point, I'm almost like, is he like a magical Trump? You know, in that kind of he has this narcissistic personality disorder, but he's not, because there's this self-awareness and the self-depreciation and the sense of humor that comes through again and again that belies that kind of idea of him as being any, you know, like Trump has no self-awareness, no self-depreciation, you know. So but yet there's a reptilian quality about, and it's particularly when he's in his 40s and the stuff that's going on in Italy, where there it does get kind of grim, you know.
Well,
just
clearly
the sheer number of bodies that seem to go through his life and then end up in the madhouse or dead, and the sheer number of women he had kids with, and then the kids die because they're not being taken care of properly. Or, I mean, it was a time when people got sick for sure as well. You know, medicine wasn't what it is now. But, you know, I read a biography once of Iggy Pop, which it reminded me of that. Like, Iggy Pop is also somebody who's self-depreciating and funny, holy shit, mercenary as fuck. And just he has a vision and he has a thing he's going after, and you can kind of come along for a while, but as soon as you're not useful anymore, you're gone.
He's clearly a sexual predator, right? But I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because, you know, predators gotta have, jungle's gotta have a predator, right? But but yeah, the self-awareness of it, I'm wondering if that's is that what got him in trouble in a way, is the fact that he was honest, and you know, especially the context of the time. I'm sure there was a whole shitload of, you know, horrible Victorian things going on behind closed doors.
Oh yeah,
as well.
and actually,
very few people were actually coming out and saying, you know, like,
yes,
you weren't having people coming back and going, I sodomized a little African boy for 3 weeks straight, you know, but that was going on, and very few people were actually fessing up to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think for sure. But the other thing that also fascinates me is at one point, you know, somebody in the States is kind of trying to use the OTO as a Ponzi scheme. And that's a place where, again, he seems to divide very sharply from the kind of the televangelist types, because Crowley's infuriated. And you know, he's like, that's not what it's about. Although he seems to have been pretty free and easy with monies that came to him through his followers. But at the same point, it never seemed like it was an organized attempt to constantly defraud people and to kind of amass a fortune. So yeah, I think it was really hard to figure out.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, I think Crowley thought that, you know, OTO money was his money, and although at the end of his life, actually, that seems to be different because he dies with this box of money, doesn't he, under his bed. Yeah, I think that he had a sense of entitlement that you know, people who were his followers in whichever way should definitely support him and give him money to, you know, not even survive, but to live in the lifestyle he's accustomed to. I think that was a definite attitude of his. But yeah, I don't think he was a deliberate kind of fraudster. You know, I don't think he was out to con people.
Like a lot of very mercurial personalities as well. I'm wondering if he almost can't help himself from being a bit of a human wrecking ball as well. Like if you're, because he's clearly a man with a huge amount of charisma, right? He's clearly a man who would walk into a room and everyone would be fascinated by, like, effortlessly as well, in a way. Like, he, you know, for whatever reason, he just had that about him. And the thing is, if you're entering a room as that kind of guy, and there's people just sticking themselves to you, and you're not necessarily going out of your way to try and do it, it's very difficult, I would imagine, sometimes to know, am I taking advantage of this person or not, if they're following you around and throwing themselves at you. I mean, there's only a certain amount of bandwidth for you to think, oh, I better be careful now whether I'm taking advantage of this person's belief in me, or if they, do you know what I mean? So there's a certain amount of callousness. I'm not saying he must have been fully aware sometimes, but other times I can imagine the kind of human wreckage left in his wake was almost like in the same way as you know, some huge truck hurtling down the road. I mean, there's just no way you can not have a certain amount of roadkill because the things run in front of you. Like, what the fuck are you going to do? And like you said, all these, some of them are like willing victims, right? I mean,
yeah, there's an element, actually, there's a chunk of the book where I remember it read like Bukowski's Women, you know, right, like just mad fights, like, and like, you know, like just screwing and fighting and, you know, these like drunkenness and like, yeah. And it was just like, wow, this is very Charles Bukowski. And then at that point, he's kind of living kind of in poverty as well at certain points. Yeah, but you know, but then, so here's another question I had that fascinated me. So there is this whole sex magic piece, which is all interesting stuff. And he's obviously a hugely oversexed person, kind of in his 20s and 30s and 40s. And then suddenly,
I would say normal, but carry on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But there's this point in the book where they
only I'm allowed to do that.
Sorry, not
Oh, yes. Yeah, don't tread on Darren's lines.
For more information. Sorry, carry on.
But you know, this no, he completely derailed my train of thought there with his.
I do apologize.
Oh yeah, so basically, there's this point where obviously his health kind of declines in his 60s, and we just, it doesn't talk about how he coped with that, right? If it was even an issue for him. But you would imagine for somebody who was such a sexual being that potentially suddenly not being able to perform, or because, you know, as his asthma gets worse and his you know, but it's completely glossed in the book, and I don't know if he ever wrote about it himself, but I was kind of like, this, it seemed like a weird elision in the book to go from him being full on Randy, you know, goat man, to bang, he seems to be celibate. And, you know,
well,
and obviously sex magic was a big part of his magic. And then I would imagine at a certain point it wasn't anymore.
you could argue he was kind of quite satiated as well, though, right?
Yeah, he'd had a good run.
Yeah, kind of thing. But just to go back a little bit to the charlatan thing as well, and to tie it into what I was saying about like how there's a certain amount of collateral damage which you kind of can't help to a certain extent. I think that's the other thing as well, is like you were saying, he's not necessarily interested in, you know, just making cash, or, you know, he's on this kind of quest of knowledge or whatever. But along the line, he can't help but notice these other people kind of taking advantage of it and cashing in. And it would be so easy for him to do it. It's you know, it's almost like sometimes doing, you know, you do the right thing, and then you see the other people doing the wrong thing and having so much fun, more fun than you, and you're thinking, why don't I just do the wrong thing? Like, it's to be so easy for me to do it, and everyone else is doing it anyway. So I'm wondering, because at certain points he hits rock bottom, right? And towards the end there's a definitely, when he starts opening lodges, that seems like a very mercenary move, right? Like at that point, that's like, okay, I really need to drum up a bit of business so I don't just die in a ditch. So I think there's that element came easy to him, but he didn't necessarily take advantage of it anywhere near as much as he could have done, right? And I'm wondering if in his other, because I think the sex addiction thing is almost a separate case, because I think he was a sex addict. So I think in that case, I think his drive just took him places, and his conscious mind couldn't keep, you know, he was just a slave to it. But in terms of the other parts of his personality, I think he was probably a lot more conscious and in control of it.
Yeah. Actually, on the topic of money, you know, and fleecing people, and, you know, gathering up money and spending it. You know, one of the flaws, you know, and I guess this is, you know, maybe this is the difference between then and now, you know, 100 odd years between, you know, when he was publishing stuff and, you know, as we're looking at it, you know, in the 21st century. But, you know, something that occurred to me is that, first of all, is whenever he would get money, he would go to a publisher and publish something. Right. That's the thing, isn't it? But, you know, he wouldn't do paperbacks. It would have to be goat skin vellum on this sort of paper, yes, and it would be like, you know, 100 quid about
for the ages.
Yeah. And you do kind of, you know, it's very easy to see the kind of folly in that, isn't it? Because, and KACZYNSKI does highlight that, is that, you know, I mean, this is someone who wrote prolifically, you know, poetry in particular, but obviously the magical stuff as well, and the Equinox and the Magic in Theory and Practice and Book of Thoth, all that stuff. And yet he, you know, he deliberately decided to put it out on these completely unaffordable formats, you know, so that, you know, only the wealthy could dream of affording them, and he would only print 100 copies, right, for example. When, you know, the whole idea of, you know, Thelema and promulgating the law of Thelema is you have to tell everyone. You know, it's because it's the new eon. You know, it's the new eon of Thelema. You have to tell everyone. And yet he's printing 100 copies of something on vellum that, you know, only rich kids can afford. So you can see, you know, but maybe it is the difference between publishing then and now. I don't know, but
right, yeah, how much mass market publishing was anyway. But
yeah.
But also point you raised there about so I mean, so the do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, for example, right? Now I can see how that can be the beauty of it in a way is how it can kind of be interpreted in so many different ways, and there's lots been written about how he was obviously ahead of his time, and then later when the counterculture came along and people latched onto these thoughts, etc., etc., etc. So how much do you think he was genuinely how much do you think he genuinely wanted to spread this system of thought, or just this way of looking at the world, to a kind of utopian ideal versus, well, I want to get away with doing what I want to do, kind of thing? Like how much, like, was he just on his own self quest, and then he wasn't necessarily that interested if, well, yeah, whatever, you do what you do, because again, that's part of do what thou wilt shall be well, you do it if you like, kind of thing. It's like I don't care if you follow my, you don't necessarily, as long as I can do what I want to do to a certain extent. So do you think he actually gave a shit if it became an utopian? I sense from Darren's mouth movements that he's disagreeing with something I just said, but yeah, go on.
Well, I wondered I'm just wondering if that reading of do what thou wilt is actually the correct reading, because I think it's been used a lot to kind of mean like do whatever you want at the expense of other people if that's what you wish. I don't know that is.
I don't mean that. I don't mean that, but I mean that's part of it. Like that's only part of it. Like it could also be if you want to take great care about what everyone else thinks and then do that as well. It's kind of what you need to get you through the day is how I read it. Let's put it that way. Like,
I disagree with that.
You disagree with that? Or,
yeah, I mean, not vehemently, because I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But and this is a topic that Thelemites discuss every half an hour on the hour, ad infinitum.
Right.
And it is interesting, but it's a continuous topic.
Yeah. You can kind of have enough, and yeah.
But I think the important thing to realize is that everyone forgets the second bit of the law of Thelema. The law of Thelema is do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.
Say it again.
Love is the law, love under will.
Love is the law, love under will.
Yeah, that's the law of Thelema. So everyone says do what thou wilt. Right. But no one says love is the law, love under will. Thelemites do, we do, but no one else does.
So love is I get the love is the law bit. I'm struggling a little bit with law under will. I'm not exactly sure.
It's love under will.
Love under will.
Love is the law, love under will.
Right, well, I'm even more confused now. I can't.
Yeah. In summary, and there are some supplementary bits that you add to this, but in summary, you have an absolute right to do your will. Right. No one can stop you from doing that. You have an absolute right to do your will, and that's what you should absolutely do. Right. But love is the law, love under will. And there's a little supplementary bit that a lot of people slot in as well, and that's a part of that's a little chapter, a little sentence from the Book of the Law, which is every man and every woman is a star. Right? Okay. So essentially what it means, without getting into a really convoluted argument, essentially what the law of Thelema is you should do your will. Yeah. But don't go hurting people because... Okay, no. I want to do...
But hang on, back up a little bit, because again, we're into interpretation here. So I get do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I get love is the law. I don't know if I'm dense or something. I don't actually understand. I understand what the words love, under, and will mean. But put them together, love, under, will. Somehow that doesn't make sense to me. Am I being stupid here? Or is anyone... love
Yeah.
and the will.
The way I interpret it, and there are 100 interpretations of this, but and this is just a personal view. But the way I interpret it is love and the will.
Yeah.
Sorry, hang on. I need to get my thoughts in order.
Right.
It's not just about doing what you want.
Yeah.
It's about having love for others around you as well, and not,
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult. I genuinely am trying to. For some reason, those three words are actually confusing. Love and will. So
yeah,
your love or your passion sublimated by your willingness, or
right. Yeah. So the main issue that most people have with these phrases, is not the love bit, it's the will bit.
Right.
So there's a very specific thelemic definition of the word will.
Okay.
That most people don't get, and I'm not sure is explained sufficiently in PERDURABO.
Right.
So the thelemic the thelemic definition of will,
right,
is somewhere, and again, personal view, and there are other people who can explain it better than me, but your will is somewhere in between your destiny and what your higher self, the part of you that is purest and closest to God or the creator, or the purest form of you.
Right, like a potential, maybe?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
So will never, ever, ever meant want.
So love, so let's rephrase it then. Love is the law. Love under your potential, and then under doesn't necessarily have to mean sublimated. That's the way I read it. It is to a lesser importance than your. So
that's where it gets tricky when you start going into that level of detail, because there are literally books have been written about this.
Well, the other thing as well, which it just strikes me as kind of interesting, is you can bend over backwards and tie yourself up in knots trying to get to an interpretation. But then also you forget that, well, in the first place, it might possibly not actually, it might be gibberish as well, right? So you're trying to impose a definite meaning on something that never had it as well. So
the general Crowley backs this up in his other writings.
Okay.
My description of will is generally the consensus amongst Thelemites, and Crowley will back that up.
Okay. Well, let's jump to Nick.
So do what thou wilt was never do what you want.
Well, what do you think, Nick? Like just before the do what thou wilt shall be the whole law, love is the law, love and the will. What did it conjure up in your brain? Like I was having difficulty with it. Darren, that's his kind of opinion, and also he brings a certain cant, for want of a better word, of what people think in general think. What did it conjure up in your head?
I think two things. I think it brings up the golden rule, right? Which do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? For me, there's an element of that, and then there's an element I get. So that's the Catholic in me, right? That's the child that was taught, and it was the golden rule more than anything else that made me turn my back on Catholicism and Christianity on the whole, because I did not see it enacted in any way by the people who held it up, right? And Clive and I talked recently about some of the atrocities that have been unearthed just very recently here in Canada, done by the Catholic Church, done by Protestant churches, the mass graves that are being unearthed every day here. So at the age of 11 or 12, I'd already got the sense that golden rule was not being done. And then there is, then I drifted towards anarchism, which also basically has ostensibly the same golden rule is there too, right? The idea that you should be free to do as you want, as long as what you do doesn't hurt other people, because everyone else also has the freedom to not be harmed, right? So that
nail on head.
Yeah. But you were saying there's a second part as well, though.
Well, no. To me, that's it. It's that conception of, it's that Christian conception of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and then the anarchistic, atheistic version of the self same, of like just yeah.
So
what you want, as long as what you want is not going to actively harm other people.
That's an accurate summary. That's an accurate summary of what most Thelemites believe.
Right. See, I have a slightly more not cynical necessarily. My way of interpreting, and again, I'm a total beginner at this, obviously, but and I think maybe it says more about me than Crowley. But reading about Crowley as well is, I think there's an added extra level, and maybe this comes with being an atheist and thinking that it all, doesn't matter anyway. Is I totally agree with that. I would love to live in a world where, people, you should do what you don't want done to you, right? That's absolutely the utopian ideal. But on the other hand, we do live in a sewer. And if you really, really, really want to do that, and you've got a raging heart on, fucking go for it. Who's to say otherwise? I think there's an edge.
Right, but you're a sociopath, Clive. so we're talking about the rest of us.
I think.
Yes. Well, that's what's interesting. Yeah, I mean, like the actual, if you separate the person, maybe the man, from the ideas, right, which is often what we need to do, right, is to tease out what maybe some really great ideas from the human being, right, who was obviously flawed.
But back to your point, the way this thread started, his mountain climbing is very interesting.
Yeah, he was really good at climbing mountains.
Yeah. He was dead good at doing that. Yeah. No, but actually, all joking aside, I found myself quite wanting to read like a slim volume just about his mountain climbing and how that related to. I don't know if that probably does exist. I don't know, but no, that was quite fascinating.
And then I guess I was also interested in all of the spycraft stuff as well, because there is that whole other side to Crowley as to whether he was or wasn't a spy, against the Germans during World War I, and then it does seem as though he certainly was, in terms of World War II, that he, Ian Fleming comes up, and trying to get him involved in writing potential code, so that the Nazis wouldn't be able to break. So there's, that's interesting. And now also there's a part where he takes a boat to the Statue of Liberty and declares Ireland as a free nation. That was something that I was like, I didn't know Crowley did that. That's awesome. So there is Crowley, the political figure, and then Crowley, as you mentioned before, Darren, like with the Yeats connection, this Irish Renaissance, the Celtic kind of Renaissance that happens at that time, and this interest in, that's when they start translating all the old stories of Cuchulainn and stuff into English, and Finn McCool.
Isn't it interesting though how much Yeats despises Crowley?
Oh yes.
Isn't that interesting? Because you'd think they'd get along.
Well, this is an interesting thing. I was trying to figure this out. I mean, I suppose this is one of the reasons I wanted to read this book, and one of the things is I'm still trying to get my head around whether I'm actually interested in Alesteir Crowley or not. Like I'm not sure if I'm searching for something that doesn't exist, if you see what I mean. Like because the thing is, so many people I'm interested in, so many people I admire, so many people who have interesting things to say were fascinated by Crowley, that it's a bit like, well, there's got to be something there. There's got to be something substantive there. But having now read one kind of beginner's guide, having read this thing, and having read around a little bit and over the years, I'm still, I mean, if there wasn't other interest, and for instance, people like Darren and the people who I don't know personally, but like, you know, if there wasn't that interest from other people, I think I would have given up years ago. Like I would have just said, like, I don't care about that. Like, you know, I don't see the worth in studying him. Let's put it that way. And I'm still kind of on the fence about it. And I'm wondering, I think, Nick, yours have slightly similar views to me, right? I was wondering if they had changed at all in the course of reading this book, or even this discussion, maybe.
No, I mean, I think I was primarily interested in the history. He's such a notorious figure, and I wanted to know more about his life and maybe why he's had the notoriety he's had, and why he had this kind of seeping effect on the culture, you know, and things I mean, you know, you may remember the 1980s, Clive, but you know, I got the Satanic Panic thing like twice because I was a heavy metal fan, and I also played Dungeons and Dragons when I was kind of 11 or 12, right? And it was a fascinating time to kind of be into anything that was, you know, people were just freaking out,
right?
And so, you know, that Crowley is this kind of figure that, again, as I said, is always on the periphery or on the fringes of these things.
Right, his name would be invoked by someone with a mullet, even though it's got nothing to do with. Yeah, no. I get that's exactly what I grew up, and because I didn't go down the rabbit hole early on like Darren did, it's always been kind of there in the background, and then I don't know. Because this sounds obviously condescending in a way. I'm wondering if it's something you have to get into at an early age, but that kind of belittles it a little bit, in so much as, you know, if it doesn't get your hooks into early, then maybe there's. But so you, Darren, clearly find him a man worth studying, right?
Right. Well, this is an interesting question, because one thing I wanted to bring up earlier that I didn't find a slot to bring it up is that there's a difference, a big difference between, you know, a Thelemite, a Crowleyite.
Okay.
So, you know, Crowley is apparently the prophet of the new eon, you know, as it says in PERDURABO and various other things. However, I am of the opinion that Crowley was kind of a dick.
Yeah.
So I'm not into, you know, worshipping people who are that much of a fucking dick.
Right.
However, I think that you know, in much the same way as someone like, you know, Woody Allen or Roman Polanski, or, you know, their body of work is
you got them in good company.
Yeah.
Or of course, the great Jimmy Savile.
Oh, I didn't catch that. That sounded funny.
The great Jimmy Savile we should bring in as well.
Oh yes. All those wonderful people.
Yeah. See, it's Clive bringing the Savile into this now.
Oh, I know. It's always in the back of his mind. I'm surprised he hasn't brought up Black Gary Glitter yet.
He was an amateur. He was an amateur compared to Jimmy Savile.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He got caught for a start.
Yeah, but there's I think there's a difference. I think that a lot of people read about Crowley, find out that people like me exist, and think all of a sudden that, oh, Darren's into Crowley.
Right.
Wasn't he dodgy? And yeah, he was fucking dodgy. Hell yeah, he's dodgy.
But that said, though, Darren, I mean, you can't exactly totally. I mean, you are clearly interested in the man to a certain extent, because I've seen your library of Alesteir Crowley books. So you can't, you know, there's obviously something about him specifically as well that interests him, not just.
Oh, for sure,
yeah.
But again, it's. I think that there are a lot of people out there that fall into this kind of cult of personality, hero worship of an individual.
Oh, I'm
into his work and not his, you know.
No. I would also like to say, just to make clear what I'm saying, I'm drawing a line between interest and worship. I don't think I've ever considered you someone who worships at the altar of Crowley. I think he's a great guy. But but you do find him interesting, and him as well, not just his.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you know, there's something. I mean, you know, Crowley is fucking punk as fuck.
This is true.
Really, isn't he? He's out there saying, yeah, we do sex shit, and yeah, I'll eat shit if you put some shit on a plate for me, and I'm going to just invite you to a theatrical performance and drug the fuck out of you. You know, there's a lot of pretty, you know, pretty kind of boundary pushing punk things about Crowley.
Yes,
that I really respect, because that, you know, he's into pushing the envelope.
Yes,
you know,
and I suppose that's been blunted a little bit by you know, nowadays it's that stuff maybe, like you said, in a way sometimes seems like the behavior of a dickish bully, but someone had to be that original dickish bully, you know, to
and I think that Crowley is being a dick, because he is obviously a dick, but he is also deliberately pushing but he's also deliberately pushing the envelope, and he is trying to stretch the boundaries of what is acceptable in society, and I like that. Is one of the things I really like about Crowley.
Yes, I don't think it's just a cover. I don't think it's just like, I want to fuck people up and I have to write this bullshit, you know, to make it look as if. I certainly don't think that. I certainly think he believed his own crap to a certain extent, and let's put it that way. Like, and getting back to that pin you mentioned as well, the thing we stuck a pin in. It's interesting, like you said, Nick, that towards the end of his life, he did start to come to a certain realization, like, oh, maybe this was just all me, and maybe it was me working out something in me, and somehow there's been this weird ass what's the word when you not side project, you know, when you make something industrial and there's something left behind, and
byproduct.
Thank you. And this byproduct is this entire kind of almost new theological world or something like that has just kind of been left behind. And it would have been interesting if you'd have lived longer to see if he would have either cashed in on it or kind of gone around saying, like, stop listening to me, or somewhere in between. Or it's kind of fascinating to think about. But like you said, Darren, I think of all the interpretations, I mean, obviously I haven't spoken to that many people, but your relation to it seems the most sensible and healthy in a way, is that suspension of disbelief. But you know, this arcane way of doing things still has value in a way, and you can reach certain points that you can't via other ways. But also, to your point, Darren, that's your way, right? That's how you, like, I personally, even though I respect that stance, I don't think I would be able to do that myself. I don't think I would be able to adapt for whatever reason. But that makes sense that, you know. So I'm wondering about I mean, like you said, even though there isn't a schism, and you try not to be judgmental maybe of other people who are interested in similar things, but you must meet a lot of fucking morons, I would have thought.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Surely, Clive, you meet a lot of morons in almost any walk of life at any time.
These ones are distilled.
That's
what I mean.
Through the filter of through the filter of
a certain type, maybe.
Yeah. Because there's all those hurdles of, like, almost if you're coming at it from there's almost like the inverse of hurdles, like how low can you go? You're going to filter out like you're just going to meet someone who is actually just made of denim and mullets one day.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, and the same is true, you know, because I've come into this, you know, through my relationship with Clive, and I do another podcast, and you know, and that's around film, not literature. But you know, the same is true in that arena, isn't it? You know, is you can, you know, because you're in a subculture, and I think that's an important word. Because you're in a subculture, then the pool, you know, the gene pool is very shallow.
Right.
Right. And you know, someone who has knowledge, or who has the films, or who has, you know, access to the subculture, you kind of have to tolerate them, regardless of how objectionable they are. You know, and that's universal. I think in a subculture, or in a small subculture.
I think that's true. I would like to come back for a second to what you said, actually, Darren, about, and I think it's really true, I think, about Crowley being a kind of a proto-punk in a way, because I do think that the culture needs to spit these people up every now and again, you know, who become a kind of almost a focus for the animus of the world. And in a weird way, the person I was thinking of, and this came up when I was actually reading it, was John Lydon, and the way he was so hated. I mean, at the time, like slashed up in the streets by, you know, kind of royalists.
That was the point, wasn't it? That was the point of John.
You know,
right.
That's the point of Crowley.
Yes, it's that I am the Antichrist, I'm an Anarchist, which is a terrible rhyme. But yeah, and then it's funny too to see where he is right now, because he's just bankrupted himself completely, because his oppositional defiance disorder just means that he can't stop kicking at anything, right? And so he's just declared bankruptcy because the rest of his whole band has sued him in penniless, because he wouldn't. There's the new Danny Boyle TV series. He wouldn't sign off on it, and then took them all to court for daring to put the Sex Pistols music in it. But there's this. But he's such a necessary. He's an idiot as well. But he's such a necessary thing.
Right.
I wouldn't like to live in a world where there hadn't been Johnny Rotten.
Yeah.
Right. And also with a certain kind of Tourette's of the mind or something as well, like where you can't kind of help yourself of pushing a button because it's there, kind of thing. Like, well, why wouldn't I? Why am I holding myself back from doing that particular thing? And then as soon as you've done it, thinking, what the fuck did I do that for?
And Marky Smith, who has already come up in this conversation, is almost cut of that same cloth as well. Somebody who will cut his own nose off despite his face, you know.
I think. But I think you're right. I think you know, obviously none of us have lived through, you know, Victorian and Edwardian times, but you know, we all know that was a pretty restrictive culture. And I think if Crowley was around in the 60s and publishing the stuff that he published at the turn of the century in the 60s, it would still be controversial.
Right.
So that's you know, that's a pretty decent accolade, you know, for boundary pushing, in my opinion.
What did you make of at the end of the book where what's the author's name again?
KACZYNSKI, Richard Kaczynski.
KACZYNSKI text, yes. Ted Kaczynski, or is it John?
I almost called him Richard McVeigh.
There you go. But at the end, he kind of, as he goes through kind of like why he thinks, or, you know, his theories as to why maybe Crowley didn't have the success, perhaps, for lack of a better word, of, say, an L. Ron Hubbard, right, who has a massive fleecing organization that spans the globe, right? And you know, he questions, you know, taking the 666, taking the Tomega Therion, however you say it, you know, the imagery from the Revelations, right? Like that it was a poor branding choice. But then I wonder how many people who are first attracted to Crowley's for that very reason, that he dared to call himself the Great Beast.
Well, here's the thing as well, right? If, for instance, you give a certain amount of latitude to, you know, I don't know, for shorthand, let's call it black magic, right? If you're going to give it a certain amount of latitude, like we said, in terms of, suspension of disbelief, but it's a system that can be used to a certain end, right? And then you mentioned L. Ron Hubbard, right? And in a certain way, like, so Scientology is also bollocks, right? But obviously some people seem to find it useful to a certain extent. Now, of course, I'm not necessarily equating the two, because I think the two main differences, on the one hand, there are a lot more examples of people being held captive by the Church of Scientology, which I don't think, as far as I know, is a big OTO thing, right? I don't think there's a captives of OTO scandal. And plus as well, even though I'm sure there are people marketing it and making money by making Alesteir Crowley keychains or something, there isn't the mercenary drain of assets approach of the Church of Scientology, right? But it is interesting to compare at least the fact that some, like, almost the belief in something brings something out of you, improves your life. So Tom Cruise thinks, for example, regardless of whether it has any actual, kind of validity, scientific validity, or relation to reality.
I've always wondered about celebrities, not just potentially Scientology, but how much of their belief comes from fear, and that fear is like that they've found themselves in a position of having huge amounts of money when they came up with actors who didn't get the breaks, or who, you know what I mean, like that is there an element of they need a way to explain why they have been so lucky, and that way to explain that is to believe in a higher power, whether that be Xenu or
Right. Well, I was wondering if there was a figure on the levels of stardom of, like, a Tom Cruise, for instance, who came out and said, I'm OTO, would there be, like, would someone suddenly, write a Going Clear style book about the evils within, OTO, or if they had any, kind of predatory leanings, or, not that I'm defending Scientology in any way, shape, or form, but it's interesting to me how one thing is slightly deemed more, or demonized less than another, whereas it's all, shilling on stuff that isn't true. And so, just to get back to that now, Darren, do you have any thoughts on that? Like I said,
also say that we're getting to Godfather 2.
Yes, I'm not trying to equate Scientology with OTO, but I'm just saying
this is going to be the first 3-hour episode.
How one kind of one is demonized, and one is, and as we said, one has obviously very different practices from another. But do you think it's fair to equate them to a certain degree as kind of systems of belief that people take on board? What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about that?
Well, I'm just considering your question.
It's a bit of a
I think if there wasn't a direct physical link between Scientology and OTO, which is L. Ron Hubbard, who was a member of OTO, and then nicked Jack Parsons' yacht.
Yes, Jack Parsons also another. Jack Parsons is one of the. There's a couple of people. Most of them we meet, I don't really care enough about. Jack Parsons is quite an interesting figure.
Yeah, I must get into that show as well. I think I watched 2 episodes of that show. What's it called? Strange Angel.
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah. They made a TV show about Jack Parsons.
Oh, right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But it's kind of, it is and it isn't Jack Parsons, and it is and isn't the story. So I don't know.
Right.
I haven't watched it all, so I watched like 2 episodes. But anyway, but yeah, I think if there wasn't a direct physical link between OTO and Scientology, you know, via one of its members, I don't think the comparison would exist.
Okay.
You know, because, you know, in my mind, you may as well compare them to, compare OTO or Crowley to David Koresh, or not David Koresh. Who's the drink the Kool-Aid bloke? Yeah, David.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, you say that though, but would that be any less valid? I mean, obviously, to a certain, you can't equate it all the way, because OTO isn't necessarily. I mean, there's a less kind of conspiratorial angle to it. But I mean, just in terms of a belief system, I mean, I would be as inclined to believe in a certain deity as lizard people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose from the outside looking in, no one is aware of the the allowances that exist in terms of believing in a theistic, believing in anything in a theistic way. What I rebel against in terms of comparisons between OTO and Scientology, and they have the right to exist, and let them carry on. But spacemen in volcanoes as part of your theology, which is Scientology, is very different to external entities who no one's really, Crowley or no one really pinned down what it was, giving the law of Thelema, which is, in my opinion, not a bad philosophy to live your life by, is a little bit different to this Dianetics life analysis stuff. I don't want to be on here bashing Scientology. I just want to highlight the.
I think
bash Scientology. It's also worth remembering that that virtually all the major religions of the world are fiercely hierarchical, right? And so when you're talking about mega churches in the south of the US, you're talking about exactly the same sort of abuses, exactly the same sort of issues. But I will say that one of the few, I don't know if we want to call it a religion, but like at least the OTO has this thing built in of do what thou will. Like there is an element of like conscious, like it's you're not supposed to completely subsume yourself, as at least not as to reading the book. I didn't get the idea that you're supposed to blindly follow the directives from those above you in a way that many other religions seem to demand a kind of obeisance and a kind of you know what I mean, like like do what we say.
Between orthodoxy and orthopraxy, and that's
exactly. And so whereas I do feel that is the case for Scientology, and it seems like it's not the case for something like the OTO.
But if you believe in this, in the Godhead theory, right, that we all have this thing somewhere in the brain which is activated by, and it almost doesn't matter what it is, but it's the thing that religion seems to tap into, our belief in a higher power, right? And I agree with you. There's a big difference between spacemen in volcanoes, which seems just to have been entirely made out of whole cloth, and slightly older belief systems, which are at least linked into some sort at some point where history and religion and magic and alchemy intertwine. So it seems more substantial in a way. Like Scientology is the crass mass market McDonald's American go west young man version. However, I'm just wondering if essentially, if you genuinely believe that a Klingon in a volcano is like, if you really believe, is that basically tapping into that same Godhead thing? Is it pressing the same button? Is it releasing the same endorphins or whatever you need?
Endorphins?
Yeah, why shouldn't it?
Right.
Why shouldn't it? Well, let people do what makes them happy.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm struggling to not have a tirade against Scientologists in this.
Well, that's the thing. You also have a right to do that, right? Like,
I do, yeah.
But you have a right to make fun of them as well, and I wholeheartedly endorse it. Go for it.
Yeah, no, it's just, but it's just, it's not worth it. To be honest with you, it's not worth my fucking time.
He's not worth it.
It's not worth my headspace.
Right.
He's not worth it. Leave him alone.
The one other character in this book, that I also found I'd like to know a little bit more, not about him specifically, but his connection with Crowley, was the fact that Crowley was hanging out with Walter Durante as well. That was fascinating to me, especially when you start thinking about how later rumors of like these, drug orgies he was supposed to be having in Moscow and stuff, and that whole thing, that sounds like a tale with, maybe it has been told, but that sounds like a tale worth telling.
Yeah. I don't think that tale has been told.
That sounds, because I was watching, do you know who Gareth Jones is? I mean, there's a lot of Gareth Jones, and you as well, of course, yes. But Gareth Jones was, he was a reporter who went over to the Soviet Union during the Holodomor, and he was one of the first people to break the stories of the Ukrainian famine, and he was one of the first people and Walter Durante, of course, was famously kind of covered that up for the New York Times and all that. But they made a film about Gareth Jones. It's called Mr. Jones. It's kind of a weird mixture. It's kind of interesting, but they also, they sex it up.
Yes, now I know what you're talking about.
Right,
yes,
right.
I want to see that film.
It's quite interesting.
It's reminded me.
It takes some liabilities with the truth, but it's still, it's quite an interesting film. And there's a whole bit in that about Walter Durante hosting these kind of orgies as well. And that I looked into it, and like you said, the story might not have been told, because I sense there's something there, but I reached a bit of a dead end really in my research there. But after having seen that and then seeing him pop up in this as well, it kind of got me interested.
Yeah, I think the link between Crowley and hedonistic orgies is I think is actually a lot stronger in people's heads than it might have been in reality.
Well, yes, and
although I think you could describe Crowley as maybe polyamorous in nature, and sexual in nature, but not necessarily all at once. It seems to be kind of serial monogamy with.
Yes, I liken it to the dot-to-dot conspiracy theory making that people do. Like nowadays, like you'll hear all these stories like, well, the Bin Laden families went on holiday with this other family, or the Rockefeller, and you're thinking, if you live in a world where you're one of the 1%, you're always going to bump into these. I mean, it's inevitable. It's not, doesn't mean that, they're all drinking the blood of, Gentiles behind your back or something like that, right?
In a pizza shop in Washington.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's the same thing here, right? In a certain point of time, if you have certain people who are putting their head above the parapets to, and interested in pushing the envelope, and then they're going to link up, right? They're going to cross continents to meet each other. They're going to hang out. So, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're all in exactly the same party at exactly the same time, all stuffing their cocks into the same, infant's mouth or something like that. Right? I don't think it works like that, right?
I'll just repeat that line.
No,
they're not all.
I just going to say, but that's a classic example, right? In a way that, like, because that sentence ended with a slightly, with a slightly sensational, you missed the point that I was saying that.
No, I got the point.
Yeah.
No, I got the point. I just wanted to highlight the shock value.
Oh, the infant, I assume.
Yeah, but it's
stuffing multiple cocks into an infant's mouth.
But it is a good example, though, isn't it? Because that's the kind of thing. Like if Crowley would have said something like that, people would remember the cocks in the infant's mouth bit, and not the bit at the beginning when he said it didn't happen.
Good point. Good point. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So does anyone have any more to say about the actual book? And I should say as well, before it's too late to say this.
I'm just assaulted by imagery of infants' mouths with cocks in now. Thank you.
Oh, welcome to my world. So
look at Nick. Look at him.
So just I should probably say at this point as well that we haven't really, and I don't think this is through any fault of our own necessarily, because this book is so massive, and because we're kind of talking about the book, and we're talking about Crowley, and because the book isn't actually that good, we've kind of sprawled all over the place, but that's not necessarily a bad thing as a conversation, but maybe we should kind of wind it up a little bit. So if there's any final talking points that we haven't mentioned, please bring them up. And also, maybe we should also kind of think about final thoughts on the book as a book. Like, is it of any worth to anyone at all, or how should you approach it, or what, contextualize it. So yeah, take it away, lads, if you have anything to say.
Well, from my perspective, I mean, as I said, I learned things I didn't know. I didn't realize Crowley was a painter. That was one thing, and there's no none of his paintings are reproduced in here, but it definitely made me want to see. Yeah.
Do they survive?
What he painted. Okay.
Do they survive?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not very good painter, to be honest.
Yeah, he's not a very good poet.
That's fine.
No.
So yeah, I mean, I said there was lots to learn. But yes, I think I've already complained about the thing that bothered me most, which was just the amount of maybe for me extraneous detail about the other people. I could have done with a lot less. It just kind of kept blunting the forward motion of the book for me.
Do you think, Nick, that you will go on to read another Crowley biography closer to maybe what you were looking for, or are you kind of full up with Crowley?
I wouldn't imagine reading it right now, but yes, in a year or two, I could definitely see coming back to the John Simmons book.
Okay.
Because I think it's probably closer to what I was hoping for. Without realizing what I was hoping for, it probably is closer to what I want. Right. Something a bit more breezy and a bit more deliberately. And maybe, as you said, there is an element of rehabilitation in this book, which is all fine and good. But I'd like a bit more of the beast, maybe. Yeah, well, you want the injury before the rehabilitation, right? Not the other way around. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Also, I think we're both keen, even though it's fictionalized, but just interested as literature, as fiction. The W. Mohom, The Magician. Have you ever read that? Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I've not read it. I only saw the film, I must admit.
Oh, I haven't even seen the film. How was the film? Was it interesting?
Bit boring, but quite an interesting dream sequence with like horned gods and stuff.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the best, but it's worth a watch. It's particularly in this context. And actually talking about films, I'm glad you mentioned films. I think I mentioned films actually. But
I'll be glad on your behalf. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm quite keen to do a follow-up, perhaps on another channel with you two.
All right.
Now that we've read Perdurabo, to maybe have a look at the singer of Iron Maiden, Bruce Dickinson's Chemical Wedding, which is all about Alesteir Crowley.
Oh,
right.
I don't think I've
not heard of A Chemical Wedding.
No, is this a documentary?
No, it's a feature film.
Oh, really?
Bruce Dickinson, the singer at the Iron Maiden,
Oh, I know.
He
directed a film that's a fictionalized reincarnation of Crowley something.
Oh,
called A Chemical Wedding.
when was this?
Probably early 2000s.
Oh, okay.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, this is coming off the top of my head, but yeah.
Okay, and you've seen it?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, a lot of my friends have seen it and said it's utter shit.
Is
but I'm
it
quite interested in watching it now that we've
right?
had this
Is
conversation.
I'm just wondering if this will fit a format perfectly. Is it currently unavailable in any? Is it on Blu-ray or DVD or anything like that?
Don't know. It was on DVD for a while.
Okay.
I'm sure it's obtainable.
Okay, well, no. If it's out of print, see, like a DVD, we could film it. We could do it as a film crack and have you on as a guest.
Oh,
As
okay.
a follow-up, yeah. But I'm sure we can do whatever we like. We can film it in somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, I'm good. I've never heard of that. I got two things on my list now.
Magician and film and
yeah,
Chemical Wedding.
Yeah,
well, also this Strange Angel thing piques my interests a little bit as well.
Yeah, I've only watched a couple of episodes, but I think they take some pretty serious liberties with what was going on.
So in order that I think I would like to give Darren a little bit the final word here because he is the guest and also because he has a lot more context than we do. So I'll go after you, Nick, and for me, I found this book I found the first half more interesting than the second half. And I also started skimming a little bit, I have to admit, in the second half, just because it was either that or throw it out the window because it was so stodgy and difficult. And even when I gave myself, like, I suspected and I said, right, I'm going to do 10 pages a day for a certain amount of time. Even that was like, that's one of my vices is I'm not very good at knuckling down and doing something if I'm not enjoying it. It's something I've never been able to do, whether it be studying for exams or I can't do it. I don't know why. So, but how can I say? I like I said, although you dispelled this notion from me, Darren. I thought it might work if you're just the biggest Crowley fanatic in the world. Then you might just enjoy reading, his shopping lists and things like that. But then again, I suppose if you're that immersed, you probably turned us off fucking ages ago in disgust that we don't know, what the hell we're on about in comparison. So I don't know. My main concern, and I if you can address this a little bit, Darren, when you do your closing thoughts, is I'm still, as I mentioned earlier, I need a bit of encouragement or otherwise to research Crowley further, or is it maybe he's just not for me and he's just kind of a historical figure of note and I kind of I know what I need to know about him, or am I missing something? Yeah.
That's a good one. By the way, I agree with you completely, both of you, on the book. I mean, just to sum up, I think
you've read it twice as well.
I have read it twice.
Yeah.
It took me a good month to read that, and I do an hour and 45-minute commute every day, each way to work, and that tells you how long it took me to read that.
Did anyone on the tube seeing you read it with a mullet and denim sidle up to you and go,
well, the thing is,
Alesteir Crowley used to shit in a bucket on stage.
I wish they had, to be honest, because it would have been a bit of a distraction from telling me what Jane Wolfe had for a fucking breakfast in 31st of July 1976. 36. But I agree with you. I mean, it really is a book that's not written for any general audience at all. It's written for a specific audience, who are nerdy Thelemites who are into the minutiae of Alesteir Crowley's life. You know, there are other books out there that are probably a lot less accurate in terms of the detail of his life, and probably even his attitudes, and you know, the kind of narrative of Alesteir Crowley. But yeah, I would agree with you both. It's a very dry read. It's overly detailed in the kind of supplementary details of Crowley, and it's not specific enough in the main details of
should
Crowley.
Make the distinction as well between nerdy Thelemites and nerdy thalidomites who can't even pick up the book. So
well, they can, if they've got a claw, they can pick it up and they can.
This is true. I forgot some of them are clawed. Before you carry on, Darren, I just want one thing I forgot. One thing I forgot to mention, I'll ask, sorry, is Richard Kaczynski, other than when you read this book, is he a name that does pop up? Like if you look around in the world of OTO or whatever, is he like, because you didn't seem to know who he was other than this book. So he's not like a sport.
No, he's not like a big, he's not like a big personality in the magical Thelemic community.
Okay.
Other than the fact that he's written this book, which has made him a personality, because people no doubt will want to ask him questions about Crowley as a result. So
right.
But yeah, no, I think I agree with you. Certainly it's a dry read. If you want a bit of titillation, there are plenty of salacious books out there that I can recommend. Apologies for not knowing the title of this in advance, but yeah, I think it's called The Great Beast by John Simmons.
Right.
It's about 200 pages long, and it's a nice little snapshot, and it's got a little bit of explanation about what the bloody hell Crowley's going on about. So that's a nice one as an alternative to any listeners of the podcast who want to kind of have a snapshot and not a kind of a thumb through the.
Do you think, linking to my other question about whether I'm done and dusted with Crowley, do you think maybe that should be my next port of call? And then do you think maybe that should be like the definitive, or the deciding thing for me, rather than, or do you think I've got, it might just be, I'm just not a Crowley lad?
Yeah, I think probably yes. I mean, there are other books out there. There's loads of other books out there. There's some really good kind of bad biographies of Crowley.
Okay.
That are fun to read.
Right.
But yeah, I think if you go Simmons, then you'll get kind of the best of both worlds, because you get the kind of, you get the Hellraiser stuff and also the philosophical, magical stuff.
Right.
Although it's not as accurate as that or as detailed as that, but yeah, I would say John Simmons is probably a good place to as a springboard. And then if you don't like what you see in John Simmons, then don't bother. Does
that sound? Because that sounds to me like a recommendation I might take on, like you said, not straight away maybe, but like in a few months or a year or something. Does that sound like something you might do, Nick? Is try the Simmons book?
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I think the general audience who aren't interested in magic and witchcraft and Thelema like I am, I think that viewing Crowley in through the lens of counterculture and subculture and pushing boundaries is an interesting way to view him. Admittedly, it is a sympathetic way to view him, but I think that does bear fruit, because I genuinely believe that this man was actually really trying to fuck with society.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said the thing about the divorcing the man from his art via the Polanski Allen thing, but I think in this case it's slightly more difficult, because the message and the art is so intertwined with the behavior in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
I think as far as Scarlet Women, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, most of the other stuff, no, but yeah, you're right. You're right. Absolutely right on that. Yeah,
it's interesting actually, considering there is a kind of pantheon of slightly hipster historical characters that Crowley, as far as I know, hasn't been cancelled yet. Isn't that interesting?
You know what? I just remembered that there's one last thing that I loved and that I completely forgot about. But there's that the casual mention that there was a period of time where he had made a musk or like a cologne out of his own sperm.
Yeah.
And was dabbing it on and had great luck with it. And then he was attempting to sell it, and it was called It, right? It was just like capital IT, and he was attempting to sell it. And
I used to dab my own piss behind my ears because I heard that worked, and it didn't.
No, that doesn't work quite.
Although having said that, it does or doesn't it?
No, it doesn't work.
No,
quite.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Just in case.
Because your ears smell of piss. So whenever anyone gets close enough, they go, ugh!
So I'm glad you took a scientific approach to it, Clive.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I'm sure you kept a meticulous notes.
The aims of science, the aims of religion and the method of science.
There we go.
Yes. That would have been the piss ears month.
Right. Yes.
So on that classy note, maybe we should wrap up.
Yes, I have to go and write up my thing about piss behind the ears for the Lancet magazine. We have been warbling on for a while. I don't know who's going to make it through all this, to be honest with you. I mean,
we are 3 hours now. We're definitely into
almost
Michael Cimino or whatever.
All right.
Territory here.
I'm gonna say let's finish then, because I'm afraid if I go any closing thoughts, one of us will have one, and then that'll lead to another one, and that'll lead to another one, and we'll be here in another 3 hours time, which is fine by me. But yes, think of the children. with cops and emmets. Right.
Cool. Okay.
See you then. Thank you, Darren. Thank you very much for making the choice. I think this has been a worthwhile discussion. Until next time,